Hello, and welcome back to Practice Intimacy. This is the place to be if you want a connected and pleasure-filled life. I'm Jamie Lynn. I'm a therapist in Austin, Texas, and I help people to create the relationship that they've always wanted and also come into a space where they're able to have the best sex with the person they love or people they love. And what I want to talk about today is how different parts of us make relationships harder. Even whenever we care about someone, it can be really difficult to be in relationship with them at times. And that's actually because of parts of us that are triggered or upset. What do I mean when I say parts? So this is kind of a buzzword in the therapy world right now, but this comes from the model Internal Family Systems, IFS for short. And if you call to mind the movie from Pixar, Inside Out, with all the different little characters, that is actually a really good way of thinking about parts. Every single one of us, human beings, we're divided into different mental states. And each one has their own way of looking at the world, their own way of reacting to the world, and their own job of how they're supposed to help us move through the world. When I think about parts, I think of them in three broad categories. Two of those usually cause us to feel distressed and more disconnected in relationship, whereas one of those different broad categories helps us to regulate and allows us to stay in deeper connection with others. In this video, I'm going to do a deeper dive into the two that make it hard to be in relationship, the ones that cause us some stress, and then we'll talk about things you can do to help with that. So, first let me break it down. These three broad categories. They are hurt parts, protective stances, and the wise mind. Hurt parts develop as we're younger. They usually develop inside of us from the time we are born until age 5 to 8, somewhere around there. Sometimes they happen a little bit later as well, but they're usually the earliest parts of us that develop. Hurt parts learn something about the world that causes internal pain and shame. So let me give some examples. Hurt parts usually have voices that sound like, I'm not good enough, I'm a bad person, no one will ever love me. And they can happen for all kinds of reasons. So I'm thinking about a range of how hurt parts come to be. And say you grew up in a family that was actually really loving and caring, and they spent time nurturing you. You still would have had moments that were scary, or where you felt disconnected, or you were not getting exactly the care you needed, and you might have had a hurt part come out of that. So say you're riding your bike and you fall off of it, and in that moment, you're by yourself. There's going to be a memory laid down in that moment, or at least there could be a memory laid down in that moment that says, I'm not safe. And that would be a hurt part. Or move a little bit further along the range. Maybe you had loving, caring parents, but they actually did not know how to raise children well. It's just not something that they were taught for whatever reason. Most people actually don't get taught how to raise children well. And so maybe they yelled at you rather than being comforting and affirming of your feelings whenever you were little. Or maybe you had loving, kind parents, but one of them fell into depression whenever you were little. And your hurt parts learned, people are going to leave me when I need them. They're not going to be there for me whenever I'm scared and alone. Or let's move even further down the spectrum of people who have hurt parts. There are some folks who are born into families where their parents actually did not want them, or they don't particularly like them. That is true for some people, not many, that's the minority, but that is possible. And so their hurt parts are going to have really different narratives around, I am unworthy, I'm a bad person, no one will ever love me, I am poisonous, there's something wrong with me. And to some extent, all of us have these messages inside of us. All of us have parts that feel as though they don't belong or are not good enough. They carry the hurt. The next level that develops is the protective stances. So we have hurt parts from childhood. Next, we move into adolescence where we have more autonomy and we're better able to take care of ourselves, and we do more moves to try and protect ourselves from being hurt again. That is our protective stance. Let me give you some examples of these. There's all kinds of examples of these, but I'm going to just focus on a few and give a really clear example from my own experience. Previously, I had a hurt part that lived in a space of I'm not good enough. And so the protective stance that came out of that was one of being as perfect as I could be. The protector was all about looking right, saying the right thing, doing the right thing. And that was the way it tried to keep me from ever feeling hurt again, which is the job of a protective stance. Its one and only job is to make it to where my system is never triggered in the way that that hurt part was triggered previously. Other protective stances might look like I'm not safe in a relationship, and so I won't get in relationships. I'll never be really close to anyone. That'll keep me from being hurt. Or they could look like numbing behaviors. Rather than feeling pain and hurt, moving towards alcohol, drugs, TV in some cases, turning on the next show and just binge watching something so I don't have to feel the hurt that's inside. And then the third broad category, wise mind, where this lives physiologically is in our prefrontal cortex. And what it does is emotionally regulate, create empathy between people, allow us to be in deeper connection with people, be more rational and attuned in relationship. And it also regulates these other two parts. So wise mind, in the language of internal family systems, Dick Schwartz calls this the self, and its job is to bring compassion, kindness, curiosity, openness to us and others and existence, really. The wise mind is the best part of oneself, the part that is the most open and available for connection. Let's talk briefly about what causes us to get into struggles. Most of the time, we find partners who are going to trigger our hurt parts. This is partly out of familiarity. We find things that are familiar because that is what's comfortable, and comfort is what most animals seek. But it also has to do with wanting to heal. I'm going to find somebody who's familiar in these ways, but different enough that I think maybe they can make it to where my hurt parts will no longer feel any hurt. What actually ends up happening is often, if my hurt part gets triggered in a moment whenever I think I'm not enough because of whatever my partner's doing, my protective stance is going to come up. And it could be all kinds of things. There are multiple different ways that we feel protective of ourselves and react protectively. It could be pulling away in that moment. It could be lashing out at the other person. It could be dissolving into tears and seeking comfort from the partner. And usually what ends up happening is whatever protective stance I have is triggering to my partner. It either triggers their hurt parts or it triggers their protective stances. And then we're in this pattern of cycling together. The more my protective stances move towards trying to get comfort, the more my partner's protective stances move away. The more I get triggered and move towards them, the more they have to move away because they're triggered. And this is the thing that happens in a lot of relationships. We're unintentionally triggering each other's old hurts and old pains without even knowing it. So what is the solution? What do we actually do to try and work on this? There are two things to do to begin working on this so that you can move out of the pattern of triggering each other and interacting with each other from hurt and protective stances. And those two things are curiosity and compassion. Both are functions of the wise mind, the prefrontal cortex. And when you activate them, it's regulating to the rest of your system. And so what are you actually trying to be curious and compassionate about? What protective stances are happening? What hurt part is showing up? and just bringing curiosity to that. If I were to think about my own partner, if I'm curious, okay, what protective stances does this person have? Usually taking space, moving away in order to regulate themselves. And if I am curious about that, I am going to be less judgmental, whereas my natural state would actually be judgment. They're pulling away is wrong, because it's so different from my system. My system does not do the pull away, it moves towards. And so instead of moving into judgment, I can be curious about it. Okay, where did they learn to do that? What does it do for them to pull away? Do I notice a difference? If they listen to their protector and they take care of themselves in that particular way, does it help? Are they more calm after? Does it help our relationship? Just a curiosity and openness and inquisitiveness about what's going on in the other person. And then you can also get curious about the hurt parts. How might their hurt be showing up? What might I be doing that's causing their hurt to show up? Doing the same for yourself is important. Okay, when I'm stressed and triggered, where do I go? What's my next move? What do I do? Let yourself be curious about, what are my protective stances? What are my hurt parts? What's happened in my history that would explain that? After the curiosity move, the next step is compassion. Curiosity and compassion help to regulate the brain, whereas judgment activates the brain, sends it into more distress. And so if in a moment you open yourself up, you're able to be curious, and you can come into a place where, oh, it makes sense that my partner needs to pull away in those moments. Or it makes sense that I feel the need to chase in those moments. And then you can bring not only the understanding, but also some kindness and tenderness towards the other person or towards yourself for having that particular protective stance. Don't beat yourself up for having protectors and hurt parts. Don't beat your partner up for having protectors and hurt parts. Instead, attempt to be curious, and then when you can, if you can, move towards compassion. Let yourself be understanding and kind-hearted towards them, knowing that they're doing the best they can, just like you're doing the best you can. And as you do that over and over and over again, what you'll find is your relationship runs more smoothly. And instead of being as triggered, you'll feel more calm and more kind towards their system and your system during moments of stress. If you like this video, remember to hit the like button, make some comments below, and subscribe to my channel. This is only the first introduction into parts work. I'll definitely be going more in depth into this subject as time goes on because it is so helpful. It's a really useful skill to be able to look at your system and identify what part of me is active right now in this moment. And then what we have to look forward to next month in March, I'm going to be going through and talking about listening and how to actively practice different skills in listening so you and your partner can become even closer to each other. I'm looking forward to seeing you then. Bye for now.